I don't even know how to phrase this, but I think actually to be with somebody when they're being born or when they're passing away, especially if it's peaceful and not traumatic, is actually like an incredible privilege. So I feel like that was such a gift and such a special time. I couldn't really believe like what a beautiful experience I'd had in such a tragic moment. And I know not everybody gets that experience. I felt very blessed, even though I was heartbroken.
Great title for a podcast, Blessings.
Thank you. Yes, I love it.
What a great meditation.
We are here to learn in the spirit of life.
I'm all about believe. You're about spreading blessings. That's great.
What about your blessings? What's the biggest blessing of life?
What a great question.
Because it's the Blessings podcast, I have to ask you, what is your biggest lesson in life?
My biggest lesson in life.
A whole lot of conversations with people about life and how those things manifest as blessings and lessons, and sometimes both.
It's my connection.
You're going to get schooled.
The journey is the journey.
What you and me are searching for are the blessings in this life.
Remember the reality of how sweet people are.
Spread blessings around the world.
You are the most remarkable energy. You make me pause, make me excited, make me think, and make me spontaneously come up with an answer. This is another one of those great moments in time in my life. Thank you for reaching out to ask if I would do the show.
Welcome back to Blessings, my friends. Have you ever found yourself in the chair of your hairstylist, pouring your heart out about your problems? Sometimes it feels pretty good to have a non-involved party to vent to. My guest today, Francesca, spent many years as an armchair therapist when she worked as a stylist, and the experience led her to crave something deeper. She became curious about the human condition, energetics, and the unseen ways things work. Today, Francesca Brunsden is a morning mindset and human design alignment coach who has made it her life's mission to support women on their journeys to self-fulfillment, joy, and success. She is a UK expat living in Canada, a mom of 4, and a trauma survivor. She hopes to empower and to inspire by sharing her story here, and I am confident that you will feel uplifted and tuned in to a new way of connecting to yourself. I would love to welcome you to the show, Francesca. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. This is such a pleasure. It's so lovely to hear yourself introduced in such a way.
I hope it's uplifting because you do that for everyone else. And so you certainly deserve to have it done for you.
Thank you.
So I'd like to get into your whole story, but let's start out with a bit of a deep question just to get the wheels turning. In your opinion, what is something that people need to get more serious about?
Oh, in my opinion, to get more serious about, I think for me over the years, it's really about enjoying the day to day. I think we live in a world where we're always working towards something. And if we get that thing, if we get the promotion, the baby, the family life, the partner, whatever it is, that's like the next thing, that we think there's going to be a magical place where we feel really great. And I think often that takes away from living intentionally and enjoying the day to day. So that has become really important to me. And I think the life experience I've had in the last 10 years has taught me that you can't wait for the thing. You've got to do it. You've got to do the thing now, or make the most of the small moments, because that's what makes up our life experience. So for me, I think, to answer your question, it's to really think about what we can do in the small moments of our day and how we can be impactful in the here and now, I guess.
With the little things.
Yeah, with the little things and just the day-to-day enjoyment, because if you can enjoy the day-to-day and if you can be intentional with how you move through your day and the actions that you're taking, it's like it compounds, and before you know it, you have moved so much closer to what it is that you wanted, and you've enjoyed the process rather than getting what you want at all costs and just waiting for that end result, whatever the end result is for you. Especially for me, I'm approaching 40 this year, so like my 30s and even just before, it was always like about the next big thing, like getting married or having your first child or having your second child. And for me, it was changing careers, but it was really drawn from wanting to find purpose in a new country and have something that fulfilled me. I always thought if I got that thing that would make me feel better, but life experience taught me that the thing didn't fix me. It was like my own fulfillment, and that really came, at least for me, in how I spent my days and how I chose to live my life, or choose to live my life even still now.
Beautiful. So you were born in the UK, is that
Yeah.
correct? Can you
Mhm.
tell us a little bit about what your life looked like when you were small and living there in the UK?
Yeah, I feel like I had a really lovely upbringing. I have one sister, parents, grandparents who were very much a part of my life. We lived in the countryside near Stansted Airport, for reference for anyone who knows the geography. But it was very like idyllic country life, but close enough to London that you could go into London very easily and enjoy city life. I feel like I was quite spoilt, really, not in the sort of spoilt with physical things, but just probably didn't realize just how easy and, in quotes, like normal my life was. I was somebody who really sought more. Like I knew straight away I didn't want to live in a small town. I knew straight away I wanted to live in London. I spent a lot of my adolescence like watching programs on TV, wondering what it would be like to work in those places that looked really exciting, that was all to do with city life. I'm definitely a city girl. And so I really craved that growing up. And I was always the kind of person that was doing something a bit different. So I did well in school. I could have gone to university, but I was the one who was like, oh, what would it be like to go get a job first? What would it be like to live and work in London? What would it be like to go against the grain a little bit? And that kind of started to follow me through my life as a bit of a pattern. So I didn't go to university. I sought out different creative avenues in order to start my career.
So you were a creative. You said you were
Mhm.
good in school. And then
Mhm.
when you got to be like a teenager, what were some of the
Mhm.
ways that creativity and that kind of unique individuality stood out to you?
Looking back, if someone said this is the way you should do things, I'd be like, why? So I was quite rebellious towards the end of school. I only really went to the lessons that I loved. And I've always found it hard to apply myself to something that I don't enjoy doing. And so when you get to the end of school and you start to have choice, I only really wanted to go to like my art lessons or graphic design, that kind of thing. I had a lot of interest in doing sort of entrepreneurial things on the side. I started doing friends' hair, just figuring it out on my own before the days of YouTube when you could like sensibly copy a format that somebody else had showed you. It was just like, oh, I think you can do this, like wrap color in foil and see what happens. And it made me really interested in vocational work, in like the practical side of learning things. It was always like an air of creativity or fashion or like something visual that kind of caught my eye. And I just knew right away that I would work in London. I just didn't know how I was going to do it or exactly what I would do. So that's where it started and how it manifested for me.
I love the creative things that come through so early in life, the art
Mm,
stuff, the things that we're
mm.
naturally drawn to. Yeah. So, what were you doing to feed into that creativity as you began to explore your possibilities as you got out of high school?
So I was one of literally, I think, two people that didn't continue to university. And I decided that I wanted to work on TV doing hair and makeup. And I probably not got the best advice from a local college to do hair and beauty as a really basic, they used to call it an MVQ. I'm not sure what it's called now, but it was like the most basic thing you could do to learn those skills. But it was, when I say it was basic, it was like writing essays about shampooing someone's hair. Yeah, it was just like it didn't feel like I was in it or doing it enough. You'd have those like dolly heads, usually local old ladies who would come in and use the services for cheap. And it's like cute and interesting. So I was like, okay, this isn't enough for me. I was a little bit older than everybody else that was in the college that I went to. And so I sought Saturday jobs. And I was just like, how can I earn money? How can I like be in the environment I want to be in? And just as luck would have it, I applied to one of the top London salons just to be like a Saturday girl, because that was a thing at the time. And I happened to have, as the universe would have it, a boss who was terrible at his job. And he just interviewed me. He didn't know what I'd come in for to be interviewed, and he offered me a full-time apprenticeship. And I remember just being like, oh my God, he's just offered me a full apprenticeship. And I found out what that meant. And it was like I got paid, I got my qualifications, I got mentored by a guy called Trevor Sorby, who ended up being the Queen's hairdresser for a while, which was really cool. So I was just like, oh my God, like he can't find out that the job that I actually applied for. So I remember being on the train, calling my parents and saying, I'm quitting college, I'm taking this job, I'm doing this apprenticeship, like it's done, I know. And luckily they were just like, okay. And that's what I did. I feel like things just opened up like really naturally for me. I would feel very lucky in that. So a little bit of help from the universe and a little bit of that gut instinct to know, wow, this is like an opportunity I can't miss. And I remember the guy saying to me, he might have been a terrible boss, but I said to him, I'm doing this qualification and I'd like to finish it and then see if I could get a job afterwards. And he was like, you can, but we'll still make you do hours. And that will take you about 3 years. And I was like 6 months into the 3-year qualification at the time. And I just sort of did the math and thought, this seems like a smart way to fast track myself and end up with a job somewhere that is my number one destination. Feel really lucky that I got that experience.
That's amazing. And what advice do you have to people who are young when opportunities come up? How do you know that's the path you're supposed to follow?
For me, it was just like a gut instinct because I kept thinking, like, what's the end goal? What's the end vision? And it's interesting now because I do this kind of work mentoring, coaching women and so on. And I can see now how I was using the tools that I now teach without even understanding what they were. I had quite a clear definition of what it would be like to work in the field that I desired. I think there was some like TV shows on at the time where they had like behind the scenes, like almost like reality TV for salons. And I remember thinking like, oh my God, that is so cool. So I had this like picture of what that could look like. And then I didn't really know how to get there, but I was keen to earn money. I was keen to be in the environment that I loved, and the idea of going on the train every day to London felt so exciting. And I was keen to learn. And I just thought, where's the best place I can learn? And at the time, like I said, I thought it was going to be the Saturday job to get like a window into that world. And so I don't know if I think I would probably still give this advice to someone who is young. Is like, how can you earn money and be learning and be in an environment where you might also get a job in the long run? And I know often that can be like internships. So for me to have this apprenticeship to be paid, even though it felt like a million pounds at the time, but now looking back, I'm like, oh wow, that was under the minimum wage. But it was better than going to college and having to get a job on the side. So it really ticked all of those boxes. I think if I could go back and tell my former self, if I hadn't done that, I'd be like, find somewhere you want to work, get a foot in the door, try and get paid there as well if you can, and figure out how you can get to the job that you want as quickly as possible. So for me, it was the apprenticeship with the job lined up at the end. And that's what I did. I just had that gut instinct. I knew when he said, we've got this full-time apprenticeship, it's 5 days a week, you train 2 evenings after you finish. And I think I got like £400 a month.
But you were
like,
living
wow,
at
I'm
home.
rich. I was
so
living
you
at
were
home.
okay.
And I literally thought I was rich too, because all my friends were at university spending God knows how much just to be there, right?
Yeah.
And I thought, and then they were saying, and obviously you get a job at the end if you qualify. And my gut was just like this, I just knew. When you just know. And I was only 19, I was living at home, as I said. So it was one of those situations where I had to say to my parents, I don't care what you say, I'm doing this. And I think they could tell that I was so sure. And there's something about being so sure, whatever age you're at, that I think carries you through to go do whatever thing it is if you have that sureness. So if you ever experience that as a young person, I think it's something to cultivate, because I think back on that now of how sure I felt as almost like a benchmark as an adult, to know that I've experienced that feeling of like absolute sureness that there's something I want to do, or a decision that I'm sure on making.
Yeah, it really strikes me what you're saying, because it's aligned with the principles of a book that I'm reading right now, Think and Grow Rich, which I'm reading for about the third time.
I have read it many times too.
But you're doing instinctually what they advise you to do. You had
Yeah.
a clear vision. It wasn't like you were reckless and sure. You were confidently practical, plan, vision, sure. Like you had everything lined up in a way that made sense. It was empowering, and it was something that you could see was the beginning of a path to something else. And then also, this phrase has come up for me so many times this week, so it's interesting that you bring it up, but the idea of putting yourself where opportunity can see you. So you've got to put yourself in places physically and mentally where your opportunity can see you. We think so much about chasing our opportunities or finding our opportunities, but we don't think about putting ourselves in places where those opportunities can find us. And that's what you did.
I think that's such a great reminder for where I'm at now as well, because I've been unconsciously, I don't know if it's when you're younger, you have a bit more. So when I decided to apply to jobs, and again, I was only thinking Saturday jobs, I was like, I'll start at the top. Like, what's the top 3 places in the country I would love to work at? And I was close enough to London to have proximity to the best places. And I got the number 1 because that's where I started and I had nothing to lose. And I think thinking about where I'm at now, I've got to a place where I'm like, how do I get in front of the people who are like my number 1? Or how can I ask, just because I've got nothing to lose, to speak here or do this or do that? And you can come down from there because it's still a win. So this is such a good reminder. And it's funny because I did that also unconsciously, and the stakes were pretty low because I was like, I didn't have much attachment to if it worked out. I was a bit like, we'll see. And I just got lucky.
I love the non-attachment thing. And that's another piece of the puzzle in the book, Think and Grow Rich, is the idea of putting yourself at the top when you can. Because they say that if you are someone who goes in thinking you're going to start at the bottom and work your way up, it's very less likely that you'll be successful, that you're much more successful when you don't accept mediocrity, that you accept going in already where you see yourself being, or close to, or in a place where you can make that jump. It's not going to be as far to jump.
Yeah. And I think it was, for me, like something looking back I hadn't realized is at the time, the guy I was working for only had 1 salon. And I was looking at all of the other guys who were like celebrity stylists or just household names, at least in the UK at the time. And when I would look up locations before, when you was doing things based, I think I was even doing it on the phone book. Oh my God. But like when I looked at it, I was like, all these other guys had, let's say 4 salons or 10 or whatever. And he had just 1. And I was like, if he's the top guy and at the moment he just has 1, if I'm in there, I'm going to meet him. And that was also a really smart decision in hindsight, because like you say, your proximity to the person who you want to be influenced by is actually close, even if within that salon there was still a lot of people that worked there. But
That's right.
His attention was around. And so that was really impactful as well.
Yeah. And it also connects to the idea of building your dream team or your mastermind, as Napoleon Hill talks about. And that's what you're doing as well. You're thinking intentionally about where you want to be, who do you want to be near, or who are you going to ask to help you along the way, even if it's not literally asking them, but by being in
around
proximity,
it.
Right. I love that you were able to do that. When you were in that salon, did you have any cool experiences? Did you meet anyone
Oh my God.
famous?
And endlessly cool experiences. I was probably there at the pinnacle of his career taking off. So he'd just got awarded an MBE, and I think the Queen had tried to employ him as her hairdresser. So to cut a long story short, he didn't really want that role because it was very restrictive. So he employed her hairdresser and he worked with us, which was fascinating to have an insight into what her life was like. And it was very much how you could imagine somebody who has that kind of hair where it's like never looks out of place. So he was on hand doing it, like I think 2 to 3 times a week, and he would travel with her. So we would have insight into that. And it was also at the height of like celebrity hairdressing, when that just first become a thing as like a PR move for big salons. So we had all sorts of people come in, and it was great because at the time I had like low stress. I would just wash their hair and get to chat to them and make sure they're really well taken care of. I wouldn't have the pressure of doing anything for them. I also got to travel on, we did big seminars across the world where they would put on a show and teach. And again, I could just come and learn and just be their sort of right-hand person, making sure they had everything they needed. I got to go on morning TV. I got to go behind the scenes, usually not on film or anything, but it'd be like a commercial or something like that. And he had a sister company where he would cut wigs for, it was called My New Hair. So for women going through any kind of cancer where they would lose their hair, he would help source a wig, but then also cut it to either look like their hair previously or so that it didn't look like a wig, essentially. So it really did look like it suited them, and it was very much the same experience as having your hair cut. So that was also really cool because we had this sort of charity part to the business. And I just felt really lucky because in the 3 years I worked there was only 3 of us that had moved through the company to qualify. So it felt like a really special experience while he was expanding his business. And it was like perfect timing. Because when I look back at the time I left and people were coming in, like they didn't get to go and do things with him, or you was like one of many who might have got chosen. And, you know, often we had a lot of men that worked there, and often they wanted a girl to go as an assistant. And I was like, finally, a great time to be a female assistant. Usually the other way around. So yeah, it was really cool. And I was super young and impressionable, and that kind of thing felt really special at the time.
That's so exciting. What an amazing opportunity that turned into. I love that.
It really was. Yeah, I worked there for about 6 years in the end, and it was a lovely experience.
That's so great. And what else was going on in your life? I know that you're married. What's your love story? Like, how did you meet your husband?
Oh, so my husband is an interesting story, actually. So I'd actually just left that salon and started at a new one. At the time, I thought I wanted to get into film. So I'd done a makeup course to make myself more available to do hair and makeup, because that was often a thing that if you could do both, you'd get booked at more jobs. So I left there, did a makeup course, and worked for a salon where they did a lot of agency work, which means you might have an opportunity to go work on a magazine, but you'll also work in the salon and do their roots before they go on set. So I did that, but I actually learned that I didn't want to work on film. It wasn't the environment for me, and I didn't like the hours. I went through quite a big life transition at the time. I met meeting my husband was like very serendipitous. I'd split up with my then boyfriend, I think, the day before. I met my now husband on a night out called The End of the World. It was like this fancy costume party. I was dressed as a Jetson. If you have that visual of like 1950s swimming costume, like the line up at the back of your legs, like everything else was silver. And I just started working at this new salon. And yeah, my husband walked into the bar that all my friends were at, and I was furious that they weren't in costume because I'd spent like 3 months making mine. And I guess the rest, they say, is history. So my parents actually split up the next day. So it was a very like transitional period. I just got a new job. My parents split up. I met my husband on the same day pretty much. And like a lot of my life changed very quickly. So yeah, and we're still together. In fact, that was 15 years ago in April. So
Was he in costume?
no, he wasn't. And that was what got us talking, because I was like, how dare you? Why are you here? This is a very serious costume party. It was the kind of party that was put on by a theatre production company. I was very into that kind of thing at the time, going to somewhere we could dress up and have fun, and there was a theme. And it was like maybe the third time we'd been to these series of parties. And they were very strict on the costume. You couldn't buy it out of a packet. It had to be made, and it was actually well before you could even buy things that easily online like you can now on Amazon. We'd gone to a lot of trouble, and he's just wearing a polo shirt and jeans, and I was like, no. Anyway, we got talking, and because my parents split up the next day, we ended up bonding over that, because I was like, wow, this is happening. And we worked very close together. We both worked in the same area, so we ended up going for lunch, and yeah, it just developed from there over the period of a summer. We had so much in common that we'd booked tickets to, I think, 3 or 4 different things. And by the last one, we was going intentionally together. So again, it was just like a serendipitous set of events that I don't even think I could have coordinated if I tried.
And how old were you when this was going on?
Oh, okay. So I'm 39 now. So I would have been, oh my God, doing terrible maths here, like 23, 24.
And when did you get married?
Just before my 28th birthday. Yeah, we actually signed up to do the London Marathon, which is, for anyone who doesn't know, it's really hard to get into because it's like a lottery system unless you're down to raise like a large sum of money to get a charity space, which is quite challenging because you have a target you have to get. And anyway, we both went in on the lottery system. And I remember being on the train one day and I was like, oh my God, I got in. And because it's so unheard of to know someone else who gets in the same year as you, I remember ringing him and being like, oh, you're going to be mad. And he was like, no, I've got something to tell you. But we both got in, which was, again, so serendipitous. And we ran together and he proposed at the end. So that was really cool. So quintessentially British of us, embarrassing looking back. So yeah, we got engaged, I think, when I was 26. And we had a somewhat fairly long engagement to make sure we could have everyone we wanted in the same place at the same time. And now when I look back on that, seems very quintessentially British because we got married at a really nice town hall. One of the great things about the UK is that like town hall buildings are old and beautiful and they're one of the cheapest places to get married. We got married in Islington and then we did the whole double-decker bus to the Thames. We got like the boat down the Thames and my dad had somehow organised it that no one else was on there because we wanted to make sure the whole party of us was on there. And I think it becomes so annoying to guarantee that with our little tickets, we would all get it in, that they just put on an extra one to make sure that all the guests could get across. And then we had our, what do you call it? Your reception in an event space that was underneath the Globe Theatre, which is on the South Bank. So it was like, we got to have one picture inside the Globe, in Shakespeare's Globe, after the performance finished. But you could literally run in because all of their lights turn off at a specific time. So we got to have one picture inside, which was really cool. And now I live here and I tell people and they're like, wow, are you like the most British person I've ever met? And I was like, no, it was just actually a really nice, reasonably priced place to get married in London that was pretty. But now it seems so funny, right? To be here and to think about doing that and how English it seems now that I take a step back from it.
It's beautiful. It's
Thank
absolutely
you.
beautiful. Wow, that's so cool.
My dad is 83 years young. Every morning, he sends my sister and I and all his grandchildren a good morning message. It's always something uplifting, positive, and encouraging. And it always says, I love you. We all look forward to this, and we know that Granddad won't be around forever. So we really cherish these messages of love and empowerment. My dad loves to say, every day is a new opportunity. And that is what he taught me. That, along with how to work smarter, hold family dear, and go after my dreams. I know there are people out there who go through the motions every day with no one saying good morning, no encouraging word, and to support a positive mindset. And there are others who are doing all the right things, but still need a little nudge to create and maintain positive habits throughout the day. So in my dad's honor, I've created Your Positive Moment. Research clearly shows the benefits of positivity and connection. A recent Gallup poll showed a significant percentage of the world is lonely. Your Positive Moment solves these problems. These are messages that come directly to your phone first thing in the morning, so you can begin every day on a high note. The message includes a loving greeting, an affirmation, a daily reflection, and an easy action step to get you going in the direction of growth and fulfillment and transformation, and to help you stack up good habits. A simple daily message has the power to change your life. Get started with your beneficial morning message habit for free. yourpositivemoment.com.
So you got married in your late 20s and now you are 39 and you have had 4 children in between. So how did that happen? When did you begin to have your kids?
Unexpectedly, it was very unexpected. I think whenever you get married, everyone's just like constantly thinking about, oh, when are you going to have children? And we were the first of all of our friends pretty much to get married. And it was so nice to be first, actually, because there was like no expectation. You're not fighting for, you get married that weekend? Oh, no, you can't because we're going here. So that was great. But it was an unconscious decision, really. I think it happened by accident. And I always thought we'd be much older, like one of maybe the last people in our friendship group to have children. And I think it was like a nice surprise because when you haven't had to think about it and it's not in a place in your life where it's like, oh God, this is going to have a big impact on our life and we're not ready for it. Like we had the house, we was married, we were pretty well set up. Unfortunately, that didn't work out. And I had never thought about, I didn't really know what a miscarriage was. I didn't really know what even happened when you had one. I hadn't heard of anyone having one. And I felt like an anomaly at the time. Now I know how, what's the word? How, I want to say frequent, but that's not the word, like how common, sorry, it is. And I was young enough that nobody else, I wasn't even 30 yet, so nobody else had experienced it. And I definitely felt that sort of pressure of, oh, you shouldn't have told anyone. It was at 11 weeks. So that prompted a bit of soul searching because we'd thought, oh, we're going through this big life change. And so both of us went into this, oh, hang on a minute, well, we're not doing that. But let's have a look around. We both probably wanted to change jobs. I wanted something more family friendly. My husband felt a bit stuck at where he was at in his career. And we did the kind of opposite. As I turned 30, we decided to do all the things you definitely can't do if you have children. So we did the like kind of rebellious, like we'll book 1,000,000 trips and did loads of city breaks. And again, I, without thinking, got pregnant again. And that kind of coincided with an opportunity that had come to us from his work where they'd said, if you are wanting to take a career jump, what about moving abroad? And so several countries were presented to us. I'll preface with the fact that I didn't want to go to any of them. I was very much, I'll go if something really serendipitous happens and can't stop ourselves from taking that opportunity. I thought I would spend my whole life around the corner from my family, experiencing something similar than I did, where my grandparents would pick me up from school. They're just down the road and you have that really nice connection to them. Not to say that my kids don't, but it's definitely a different experience. And then it happened really quickly. Like my husband got offered a job here. I think within 6 weeks, we had gone from making the decision to physically being here in the country. And so we found ourselves
in Canada. I'm just going to
Yeah.
preface that because I'm in the US. So people
Oh,
remember
sorry.
you're in
Yes.
Canada.
I didn't realize you traveled from there when we met in person. Okay, that's making a lot more sense now. I was like, oh, okay. When you like don't know one thing and you're like, oh, I can't quite like anyway.
Yes.
The penny has dropped. Thank you for telling me. So it was funny because I had never been to Canada. I'd never been to Toronto. Didn't know really anything about it other than at the time it was ranked as one of the best cities to live in and it wasn't too far. I thought we was going to come back after a year or two. So I felt like the language barrier for anywhere was going to be too difficult for me to integrate myself. So anyway, we found ourselves here on the snowiest day, February 1st, 2015. And I arrived pregnant. So in between time, again, unconsciously to what we was planning, we found ourselves pregnant again. So that was a real joy. And we was a lot more cautious and had all of the scans before we left the UK and came here. So it felt very exciting to start a new life, to have that experience of coming into a new place with a really great setup with his job and everything that we'd chosen. And then being able to have this experience to have a baby in a new country. So it felt like the perfect transition. That was what we thought was going to happen, at least anyway. It was not quite how it went. So yeah, and that was 9 years ago. We arrived here.
Wow.
So be careful what you say you'll do.
So take us through, I know that this is the start of a very tumultuous, traumatic period of your life. And I know there's so much there that people will be able to relate to. So Why don't you just begin and take us through the series of events that took place for you?
Yeah, we landed here. I didn't know too much about the city. My plan was to be like the best pregnant woman in the world. So naively, I was like, I'm going to drink smoothies and go to the gym and do baby yoga and make new pregnant friends. And we arrived in the midst of a snowstorm. And I was very optimistic, but really quite nervous, I think, looking back, because the idea for me at the time to be in a new place I'd never been to before, essentially on my own while my husband was working, felt like one of the scariest things to do. I remember having this fear of like, how will we know how to get SIM numbers or new phones? Like all of those things felt so alien. But looking back, they were actually very easy because I'd had my 12-week scan in the UK, and it's a very different experience there. Like I had a midwife, like everyone had a midwife. You go to your midwife and they do all of the things, versus here, my experience at least had been go to this person for this appointment, go to that person for this. So even just to get a family doctor, we didn't have healthcare because for the first 3 months, you don't get it. We're so lucky from being in the Commonwealth and having all of the privileges that I do, not just being British, but also being white, having health insurance and all of the things. So I'll preface with like, we couldn't have been better set up for this to be like an easy experience. So anyway, we had insurance. I got set up with a family doctor. I didn't really know anything about the healthcare system. I just thought it was going to be exactly the same. So I find myself in beginning of March going to my 20-week scan in like, somewhere on Bay Street in a office block, which I was like, this is weird. I'm used to going to a hospital and someone just taking you through the whole process. And I didn't realize how disjointed things were. So I had my scan and they were like, well, you can come back tomorrow for the results. And I was like, that's weird. But again, I'm like, oh, this is just how the Canadians do it. And maybe some of that is because I didn't know any different at the time. So we go home, I'd find out it was a boy, and we're talking about names and doing all the things that new parents do. And I felt this sense of assurance because we'd had the 12-week scan, we'd just gone to that one. Anyway, when I came back the next day to get my results, it was like immediately everything was weird and off. And they'd called me in to have another scan, and when no one's saying anything, it's silent. They kept asking me all these weird questions. Did they say this to you when you had your other scan in the UK? And I thought it was because I had a student doing it and they were talking a lot. But at some point, my heart kind of sank and I was like, something's not right and I don't know what it is. Anyway, I was kept there for a number of hours. My husband had to go back to work. And I was called in by the consultant, who was the most unfriendly person I've ever met. He didn't look me in the eye. And I immediately said, what's wrong? And he was like, there's something wrong with the baby's skeleton. He handed me some paperwork and was like, just go to the hospital. And I was like, what on earth do you mean? So being the naive person I was then, I didn't ask any questions. I was like, oh God, I don't want to upset anyone. It came out with all of this paperwork that meant nothing to me. And I remember just Googling everything on it. And when I started Googling stuff, my heart sank because I don't think they should have even given me the paperwork. And it was like a real turning point in my life where like I remember it really clearly. I was like on a back street connected to Bay Street, trying to get a yellow taxi to Michael Garron, because that's the only hospital I even knew existed. Calling my husband and I'm like, there's something wrong with the baby's skeleton. And it felt like this is going to be like a moment that I don't forget. And it really was. I can like totally picture the scene right now. And I turned up at Michael Garron as if they are like expecting me in floods of tears with the paperwork. My husband's now there with me. And they obviously have no idea what I'm talking about, why I'm there, or what is even on this paper. And I'd taken pictures. And anyway, they left me to go home. So I'd gone home with this information that I'm then Googling. And the first thing I remember Googling was what it was translating to, was because the information that I had was a couple of words, and then all of the measurements of his limbs were like less than 1%. And so I was Googling those measurements, and it was sharing things like dwarfism or a condition called osteogenesis imperfecta, which is brittle bone disease. And so anyway, we spent like days waiting. This was on a Wednesday. We didn't have an appointment with a consultant till the Friday. So we'd spent 2 days like driving ourselves borderline crazy trying to figure out what was going on. And you go through all of the eventualities. Are we going to have a disabled child? What do we think about that? Can we on our insurance? Are we going to have to move home? We're having all of these round and round conversations. And we eventually arrive at the hospital, and the doctor said to us, you probably know more than I do. He was like, I'm a fetal medicine specialist, but I'm not a specialist in every single like disease or whatever. And if you've spent a long time Googling it, you'll be very much in the know. And so everything was just such a waiting game. And it was honestly so excruciating. So the long story short is we ended up getting pushed around to different genetic specialists, and we found this incredible man, or we got put in front of him, called Dr. Chitiat, who I've since met a lot of other people who have been under his care, and he is like the most incredible human. He was so reassuring. He was like, you're going to have a baby. Everything's going to be fine. We're going to figure out what's happening with this. And he was so reassuring. But the bottom line was the condition that our son had was incompatible with life. So what that means is that they essentially will not survive out of utero. And we got a lot of misinformation, not from him necessarily, but from different doctors we saw up until then. And we didn't have insurance. We couldn't really have any of the testing because it was so expensive at the time, or they didn't do it in the country. A lot of things were being outsourced to the US back then. And we didn't have any of our records here. It was just like a really confusing time. So essentially what happened was we had to make the decision, because I was about 22 weeks by this point. And when you get to 25 weeks, if you change your mind, it goes to an ethics board, because the baby, or however you want to describe your child, is considered like a living person at 25 weeks. So we were under a very quick decision period. So once we'd made the decision that I didn't feel mentally or physically prepared to have just let the baby pass away at whatever stage from that point to 40 weeks and just give birth knowing that he was going to pass, I was like, I just don't think I can go through that. And so we had to make the decision to be induced and give birth. And then there's a wait. So that was like the real kicker. It's like, oh, there's not an appointment to do that. There's only one hospital they do it in the city, which is Sinai. So I was on like a wait list, and we just about made it before the 25 weeks. So I then had to walk around pregnant for almost 2 weeks, approaching all my like new pregnant friends who, yeah, it was like painful. People were like, oh, did you find out if you're having a boy or a girl? And at the time I had no capacity to sugarcoat anything because it was just so much to process that I would literally say a dead baby boy and things like that. So it was very intense. But anyway, we get to the day where I'm giving birth, and one thing I didn't anticipate was that experience was actually an enjoyable one. I don't know if that's the right words, but it was like a very precious time, like a memory that I hold on to now. Like I'm approaching that at the end of this month. And it's something that I really cherish, that I actually thought was going to be horrendous. And whilst obviously that experience is horrendous, no one wants to go through that. It's everyone's worst nightmare. I guess I was just scared of death. Like before that, I hadn't really seen any person really die or seen them in the flesh after passing. And so the thought of giving birth and then seeing your own child in that state just felt like the most terrifying thing I could do. So I went in very much armed with what the experience was going to be like. One of my cousins is a midwife, and so I'd asked her every question you could think of and prepared myself as much as possible. But what we wasn't expecting was when I gave birth, the nurse pretty much screamed, "Oh my God, he's alive." And I didn't know that was an option, that he would be born alive and then like slowly pass away. So we're all in floods of tears. I think she'd shocked us, and I'm glad she did, because although that was very scary at the time, I think if something different had happened, I might have had a different experience and I might have regretted what I'd chosen. I remember saying, what happens now if he's alive? What do we do? And they said he'll peacefully pass away, and we'll either take him and we'll care for him until that happens, or you can hold him until that happens. And of course, I chose the latter. So we sat in the room. My mum happened to be visiting, and we called her to the hospital, and we had a few hours like passing him round. And I don't even know how to phrase this, but I think actually to be with somebody when they're being born or when they're passing away, especially if it's peaceful and not traumatic, um, is actually like an incredible privilege. So I feel like that was such a gift and such a special time. And then the kind of serendipitous moment was that he's then born Canadian. So he had his own OHIP. He had his own, because if you are, again, something you would never think of is if you were born on foreign soil, or at least this is true in Canada, I don't know about anywhere else, and both your parents aren't citizens, you are born to their nationality. But because he was born alive, he was born as a Canadian, much like my other children, they're all Canadians, who will eventually have a British passport. And so he had his own OHIP. He paid for all of his own testing. He paid for all of the things that were out of scope on our insurance. So I feel like that was like a gift to us that we wouldn't have even anticipated. And so his like very short life was quite incredible, really.
Did he pass that day, the same day? He was born?
Yeah, in our arms, pretty much. But it was very peaceful to be. Obviously, it was heartbreaking, like we're just passing him around and crying our eyes out. But it was very peaceful experience, and I've had 3 births since then, and at least I don't know if it was the drugs they gave me, or I don't really know what was going on up until that point, but it was a very euphoric experience. Like I really felt like, oh wow, this is what motherhood feels like. Although the other side of that is like your hormones come in, like my milk came in and he passed by then, and it was like the biggest high mixed with then the lowest low, and you add hormones into the mix, and I couldn't really believe like what a beautiful experience I'd had in such a tragic moment. And I know not everybody gets that experience. I felt very blessed, even though I was heartbroken. And then after that just felt like a dive off a cliff, because leaving the hospital without a baby, without a real purpose in the country that I'd found myself in, I felt like I got the booby prize, and I was probably quite bitter about it for quite some time. And it was a strange experience because we'd had to choose to go through this, and the counselling I got was very confusing, and I didn't feel like I had a similar experience to other people because I was in a different country. I'd supposedly chosen it. It was still considered a termination, which has a lot of complications with how you feel about it, but also about how other people feel about it. And so I felt really isolated at the time because I couldn't possibly, it took me about a lot, I don't know how long, but a long time to tell people that I just met there the circumstances in which it had happened, because I just couldn't handle any form of judgment. And luckily people had no clue that most people were like, she wasn't pregnant, she was pregnant and now she is, and didn't really ask questions about what happened in the meantime. So that was a blessing, at least at the time. And then I went on to be very vocal about it because I didn't really know how else to deal with the emotions in the day to day.
I can't even imagine having to go through something like that. And thank you so much for sharing about that. So I have some natural questions.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Did you name him?
We did, yes. So after, and again, maybe I wouldn't have if I hadn't found myself in this situation, because I thought at the onset, I just need to forget about this and black it out, because it just felt such like a horrible thing to deal with. And actually, after 20 weeks, you have to legally name your baby and you have to have a legal funeral. So yeah, we named him Phoenix. I like unusual names. We knew we wasn't going to have to call it out in the school playground, and I think everyone was willing to give me free rein because I was so upset. Let her pick any name. And I really like the meaning behind it, to rise from the ashes, and that's being a big theme through my life ever since. I didn't really know the meaning at the time. Like I'd chosen the name based on likes, and then when I found out the meaning, I was like, okay, there has to come some meaning from this situation. So that seemed like a really nice one to hold on to.
Yeah. And is Phoenix one of your 4?
He is, yes.
Yeah. Wow. What do you think that whole experience was meant to teach you?
Looking back, I think I don't think I would be such a grateful parent. Obviously, I struggle with all the day-to-day things that we all do as parents, but I think it was very humbling, and I think it really shifted my outlook on life because I feel as though at the time I experienced the worst thing I could possibly experience as an individual. So nothing else began to matter too much. I think I've become a person that's can, maybe to my detriment sometimes,
Mm.
not sweat about the small stuff too much. Like I don't think too far into the future. Obviously, I daydream and I vision things, but I worry more about the here and now. I don't worry too much about material things. Something gets broken or lost doesn't really faze me too much. And I think it gave me an opportunity to really reset my thinking and my life, not necessarily in the way I would choose, but it was a huge turning point for me, a huge turning point.
And I know that it wasn't the last tragic experience with death
Mhm.
that you had. Can you talk a little bit about how messages of dealing with the fear of death, handling death have come through in other ways in your life? I know you had another experience that you wanted to
Mm.
share as well.
Yeah, I think I'd gone from being someone who just assumed that only like grandparents pass away when you're young, and if you're very unlucky, maybe your parents, but um that there was like that natural order to things. And I become quite quickly scared of worrying about my husband dying or something else coming out of nowhere. And I think I held on to a lot of that fear for a long time. In fact, I developed like a rash on my body that I couldn't get rid of for a long time. And it was all like the stress manifesting. I'm a very calm person, but I think you have to let that emotion out, and I probably wasn't. And so over time, I tried all different modalities to reset all my nervous system. And I was very lucky to make almost like a friend who was a bit like a fairy godmother. She was a bit older than me, took me under her wing, become a really great friend. And again, she very tragically died of breast cancer a couple of years after that. And I think all of these things just kept reminding me how precious life is. It has made, especially here where I'm away from my family, I have had to choose my own career path rather than it be something that was obvious or laid out to me before getting here. That I it's given me a lot of perspective, and um it's made me want to be really intentional in how I spend my time and what I do and how I live my life. It's not like I live the most extraordinary life, but I do genuinely feel like I get to do work that I love and live, and within the boundaries of what is my current reality, I get to do what I want most of the time. And I've had to curate that over a long period of time, but I don't think I'm scared of it anymore. I don't think I'm personally scared of dying. And the spiritual connection it's given to me has created a lot of meaning around very small things in my day to day. Like it really sparked this sentimental look at life. Because Phoenix had such an unusual name, I would start seeing his name everywhere, or like symbols and little nods to I haven't completely left. And I think that opened me up to synchronicity, to spirituality, to following a path, to coach other people through that connection, and really connecting to my own intuition, trusting myself, and really circling back to the very beginning, what we talked about, following my own gut instincts on things, because there were so many periods through my journey where I had a gut instinct that I didn't necessarily follow, but exactly what I thought. When you're like, oh, that doesn't make sense, where I've learned to trust that over the years. So I think for me, it's the connection to my intuition. The sort of fear of dying isn't there as maybe it would have been otherwise, and really wanting to make the most out of my life
Mhm. And I know
has.
that you work now with a lot of these healing modalities. In
Mm,
particular, you just mentioned that you had a rash that, as a
mm,
reaction to the central nervous system stress that was
Mhm.
the result of the things that you're going through. And I can relate to that. I've had a similar experience over the past couple of years myself, where
Mhm.
different things in your life can create a perfect storm that actually manifests in physical symptoms.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so that is that a part of your work now, that you help people do maybe what this beautiful friend of yours who you lost was helping to do
Mhm.
for you? And
Yeah.
when did you know that this was your calling?
I think it was a bit of a slow burn. So I was introduced to Reiki when I had this rash because I couldn't imagine anybody touching my skin, but I was very aware that my internal nervous system was like really unhappy. And then my skin was showing that. I got introduced to Reiki and I used it mostly on myself to calm myself down for a while. And then I used it throughout my next pregnancy to again feel like I was doing something for my body and my baby, and it became just like a self-soothing system. And that was really like a catalyst to open the door to all of these other modalities. And as we've talked about, I'm a hairstylist by trade, but I think in the pandemic, by which point I'd had all three of my children. So I had three children under 3.5. And interestingly, you get told you can't have children and it's going to be really challenging and you're going to need all of these interventions. And actually, our story ended up being the opposite, where we had three children in quick succession. And so I found myself in the pandemic with all three of them home. They were all under 3.5. And I had a newborn. And I was like, hairdressing just seemed like the thing I was never going to be able to do in those circumstances. But I really missed the human connection. And I was putting myself through all of these different modalities and coaching programs because I felt if I didn't do that, it was like a sink or swim. And with the background of everything that had happened till then, it was like, oh, this is like the fairy tale. I've got the children, like everything's good. And now the pandemic. So I like self-coached myself through programs and things that I was interested in. And then had this moment of, oh wow, I could do this to help other people. And that kind of is what that moment in time, probably 2 to 3 years ago, was the transition into where I am now, of wanting to just help women, to mentor them. I got big into human design and what that means about your soul's journey and your purpose, and how it's quite tightly connected to energy work because it's about your energy type. So I had this little toolbox of things I was doing for myself that I had a real desire to share with other women, especially women who are either struggling to have children or had children and maybe were feeling completely lost like I was. Yeah, and here we are. Now I coach people in the morning, most mornings of the week.
Yes. So you went from helping people to take care of their outer beauty to fostering inner beauty.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that you have a beautiful morning program. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, so I kind of work under the three principles that visualizing or meditating have a real impact on how, goes back to the beginning of having that vision. What is it that I want for my life? And also, they're great tools in the day to day. I think of meditation as like practicing how we show up in the world, thinking about how am I going to show up today and how do I move through the day and who am I, so that when we go into the day, we actually can show up in that way. So setting that intention at the beginning of the day. So I do visualization and or meditation or a combination, and then we set intentions together. So really bringing ourselves into the present moment, not saying I would like to do X today. It's like I am embodying, and then inserting our own personalization so that we're really bringing how we feel into the present moment. And then the last piece is like either learning something or thinking about what we feed our mind with in the morning, because we often don't think about that. We wake up, we clean our teeth, we have a shower, but we completely take for granted the state our mind is in when we start the day. And I'm somebody who, as a result of this experience, would wake up feeling very anxious. I used to suffer, or I still do sometimes, with really bad nightmares and things. And so I was waking up glass half empty for a very long time. And in the pandemic, I had to really get creative on how, with three kids at home, could I like be functionable when I couldn't rely always on like exercise, because it's a great modality, but the secondary gain is that you feel good mentally, but it's not like the intention necessarily. So I was okay, how can I intentionally start my day focused on what I want, not what I don't want, focused on where I'm going and the vision I'm creating for myself and actually feeling good. So with these modalities I put together in a little package, I started at the beginning doing it with friends. I was in several coaching programs, and with every coach, I said, what is the most impactful way that I can use this material and integrate it into my life? And everyone said a morning practice. And I was doing it a bit ad hoc. If I woke up early enough and I was in a good mood, I'd do it. And so I committed, I think 2 years ago now, to 30 days, not 30 days, no, 90 days. I did it with a group of friends, and it had such an impact on my life, like how I felt and how excited I was to get up every day. Like I was looking forward to doing it the next day. And my reality totally started to shift. The things I was writing down started to happen. I was more optimistic. I was taking more action. And my clients started doing it. Like I had a few one-on-one clients at the time, and we were all posting on Instagram after we did it. And it was cute. And then I was like, why don't I do this with them? So I put a shout out not last summer, the summer before. I'm going to do this for 100 days. Who wants to join me? So just visualizing, reading a chapter from a book. In fact, one of them, the books I used to read from was Think and Grow Rich. So it was a very simple practice at the outset. And I had 45 women sign up. And I was like flabbergasted because I only wanted 4 to make it viable for me to wake up in the morning. And I thought I was going to repeat the same thing every day for the 100 days. That was the plan. And as I started, it was almost like without thinking, I just went into this pattern of creating content every day, doing different visualizations. And that's become the mainstay of my business. And it was great because it worked around children. They could be as sick as they liked, but I could take half an hour from 6 to 6:30 and still care for them or do whatever else throughout the day. And that's ultimately what I'm encouraging other women to do. I know you have a busy life. I know you maybe have children or lots of other things in your life where responsibilities and people who depend on you, but I know you are going to feel better today if you take that 30 minutes for yourself, and if you take it on the front end of your day rather than chasing it all night and never feeling satiated. And I know that if you wake up thinking about what you want, like being intentional, having a focus and learning something that isn't based on a reaction from something you're seeing from your phone, that you are going to have a better day. And if that compounds over a period of time, your life is going to change without question.
It sounds so beautiful. And what time do you do this? It's Eastern time, right?
Eastern
6 o'clock
time, yeah.
Eastern time every day.
Yeah. And so Monday to Friday, 3 weeks of the month. And then we have an integration and action week where we can catch up on sleep. People can listen to replays and I can get re-inspired. And so we create that cycle every 4 weeks.
It's beautiful. We'll leave the information in the show notes for anyone who wants to get involved with that beautiful morning program.
Thank you.
Can you tell us what you think are the biggest lessons you've learned in your life?
Oh, that's a great question. I think the first one is don't sweat the small stuff. It's never as important as you think it is. Number 2 is probably like to choose to be courageous versus wait until you have to be. And always trust your intuition. I personally think it's never wrong. We often go against it, or we don't trust it, or it doesn't make logical sense.
Yeah. But
I bet that no one listening to this has ever followed it and it's gone wrong. So
1,000,000%. I totally agree with that. I love that. Oh my gosh, beautiful. And what about your blessings? What's your biggest blessing of your life, do you think?
Having and losing children. Yeah.
Beautiful. I just have one more question. It's a personal one, something you mentioned. You said when we realized we had met in Toronto at another event, and you just put it together that I was from the US and I had driven up there to Toronto to attend this event. And when you had that realization, you said, the penny has dropped. Now, I told you before we started that my mom was English. And one of the signs that she sends me is pennies. And often they will be English pennies, and I'll find them around my house. Now, I've been to England, so I have had English coins, but they will show up in places where I don't know how they've gotten there. And they show up for my father and for my sister in the same way.
Wow.
Is that an expression that is English? The penny has dropped? Like,
I
where did you
think
get
so.
that? Why did you say that?
I don't know. Honestly, it just came out. I believe so heavily in those signs. So I believe that was delivered just through me. It's funny because I live with my husband's English, and it becomes confusing sometimes because we speak to each other probably the most. And so sometimes I'm like, did I make that saying up? Is it English? Like, it's sometimes being here for so long now that I forget. So when someone calls me out on it, so I'll have to look it up. But the pennies dropped for me it's all making sense now. That's essentially what it means for me. But it's interesting because I have a similar experience, not with pennies, but with feathers, where that's my sign, one of them anyway. And it will be like, there's nothing with a feather in here. How did this get here? But it arrives at the perfect moment. And if anyone who's been in my program or ever does come into my program knows I talk so much about synchronicities and signs, and they're like that little nod from the universe. So I'm glad, I feel privileged to be able to deliver one to you unconsciously.
That's just.
So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. Thanks for being with me, Francesca.
Thank you for giving me so much of your time. I really appreciate it.
Hey, everybody still listening, will you go give a 5-star review to this podcast? Mitzi puts in so much effort and so much love into this. She's brilliant. She deserves it. So I am going to go right now. By the way, by the time you hear this and you go give your 5-star review, you should be able to go find my 5-star review of this podcast. But I just want to thank you for what you're doing.